We are here today with Dr. Rick Hanson. He is a psychologist, a New York Times best-selling author, and he's been a speaker at NASA, Oxford, Stanford, Harvard, a lot of other major places, and now at Thriving Launch.
All right, Thriving Launchers. I am really happy to bring on Rick Hanson today to talk about happiness. And my first question, well, as usual, are you ready to launch, Rick?
I've been launching all day long, so I'm still ready.
I love it. Well, the first question I was asking you before the show for me is kind of an interesting one because we're talking about happiness, and happiness is such a vague term to me. I mean, I'm curious, and I know a lot of the audience members. I know that you probably already know, like, it might seem like a silly question, but I still want to ask from somebody who's researched the subject, what is happiness? How do we measure happiness? And how do we even know whether or not we're genuinely happy or just kind of like induced by something that isn't really actually genuine, true happiness?
Those are great, deep questions. I think it's a great place to start. So briefly, people use words in different ways. The way I use the word happiness, and researchers generally use that word, is a kind of synonym for well-being. And there are basically two components to well-being, hedonia and eudaimonia. What those fancy words mean, hedonia, hedonic, like hedonism. That's the territory of having a good dinner with friends, watching a basketball game and your team is winning, delighting in your toddler, taking her first steps across the living room, looking at a sunset, ordinary pleasures of life, satisfaction in finishing a load of dishes or a big project at work. That's hedonia. And then you have eudaimonia, a deeper, more profound sense of fulfillment, meaning, and purpose. And with regard to eudaimonia, I think about people who work in, relief agencies with refugees, say, or parents walking their baby back and forth at 3 a.m. They're not particularly happy about walking their baby back and forth at 3 a.m, but it's the most meaningful and important experience of their life. So that's eudaimonia. So the two together give us well-being. And well-being is important because besides feeling good, it fuels us for the long haul in life, and it helps us recover from setbacks. If deep down inside you feel like you're running on empty, if anything gets tough, it really crunches you. But if on the other hand, you feel like you're running on full, you've got lots of inner resources, even if kind of around the edges, you feel anxious or stressed or frazzled or hurt, deep in your core, there's a combination of calm strength, contentment, and inner peace with, I would also add, a lovingness, a warm-heartedness. So that's the essence of well-being. And the way you know it's real is, can you sustain that core of well-being even when things are challenging? Right? It's easy to be happy when they're you're getting a mani-pedi and I've never had one myself. I just hear about it, and they're fluffing your hair pouring bonbons at you. And, yeah, IV chocolate, all the rest of that. Oh, yeah, that's easy. But can you retain this core of well-being at the end of a real long day or while, dealing with a tricky situation with somebody else or recovering from a setback, and that's the true test. Finishing up, I think of well-being as like the keel of a sailboat. The deeper the keel, the more that the sailboat can go out and dream big dreams and swing for the fences and sail the deep, dark blue. And when, the winds of life blow and bang on us, we can still recover quickly.
Luis, I'm so glad you asked that question. I really am, because Rick, you answered it so beautifully on how we can measure or understand what happiness or well-being is, because oftentimes it's like this elusive sense of a feeling that we have one moment and then we don't have the next. And I would love to hear just some tips that you've discovered in your research on how to create happiness in a more sustainable way.
Right. Well, I'm a practical guy, and so I think you've got the right question. First, to just acknowledge it, external circumstances matter, right? The people we live with, work with, sleep with, whether there's, larger scale For example, civil society in the country we live in, a social safety net, good health care, and all the rest of that. Those factors matter. Okay, having acknowledged external factors, probably the primary sources of happiness and well-being and courage and confidence and ambition, and as you say, this internal attitude of launching, the primary causes of all that are psychological, mental factors of various kinds, inner resources, inner strength. So then the question becomes, how can we grow the causes of a durable well-being, even as we go through the ups and downs of life? And those causes are inner characteristics like resilience, gratitude, compassion, mindfulness, feeling loved, feeling loving, and so forth. So how do you grow the good, right? That's the key question. How do you grow the good? And this is where neuropsychology can really, really help us. Just a little bit is very, very useful. And it has to do with the idea that we grow confidence or feeling loved by others or feeling worthy as a person, or we develop healing from, let's say, childhood trauma. We do that through a process, in a word, of learning, which is a two-stage process. To grow anything we want to grow inside. So just imagine what you wish you had more of: more happiness, more gratitude, more patience, maybe with your teenagers, taking it less personally when your boss is, grouchy, more sense of confidence or drive or motivation toward important goals. Whatever you want to grow, you grow it in two steps. First, you have to experience it. In a sense, you get that song playing inside your mind. And then second, you have to turn that experience, you have to transform that experience into a lasting change in the nervous system. Otherwise, without that second step of recording this song, there's no lasting value. There's no healing, there's no growth, there's no learning, there's no development. And so it's critically important as you go through your day, when you're having various beneficial experiences, feeling connected with somebody, having an insight about how to be more skillful in your relationship, say, it goes better when you kind of lean into the interaction rather than lean out of it, for example. When you have a beneficial experience, or you're just enjoying life, or you have a sense of accomplishment, or right now I'm looking out the window and seeing the hills in Northern California near my home. When you have that beneficial experience, slow it down. Help your brain turn that into a lasting change of neural structure or function, which usually takes at least a few seconds, and the longer the better. So you stay with it, you savor it, you kind of marinate in the experience, you open up to it inside yourself. Nobody needs to know you're doing this at work. They don't need to know that you're really being like a human sponge, soaking these experiences into you. But as you do this, or 2 or 3 breaths in a row, really just 1 or 2 dozen seconds is all it usually takes. Bit by bit, synapse by synapse, you are gradually hardwiring inner strengths into yourself for both the difficult things in life and to have more well-being along the way.
Some really great information that you've given us in the two-step process. I'm really excited to talk about it. One of the things that you said is like putting on a song and practicing a song or listening to a song was kind of what I got from you. And then the step 2 is bringing that song or that thing that you're playing, bringing it into the nervous system for long-lasting change. I'm really looking forward to talking about the step 2 because I know that a lot of us, I want to cover it briefly, but I know that a lot of us kind of get this idea of, okay, so if I start thinking about things that I want to have in my life or ways that I want to feel and be, that's like playing the song, right? If I start listening to music that kind of makes me think about that thing, if I start reading books or having conversations, if I start engaging in some sort of way of entertaining or interacting with what I desire, that helps bring it into reality. Is that kind of what I'm hearing from you?
Right, but that's only half of it. And that's important, just like part 1 and most self-help focuses on this part. Get a good state of mind going, a useful perspective, an insight, an inspirational idea, maybe a good feeling in your body. But if we don't turn that state into a trait, there's no lasting value. And that's the dirty little secret. of lots of self-help and coaching and psychotherapy, and I'm speaking of myself here, raising kids, mindfulness training, human resources development. We're good at helping people have beneficial experiences, but generally we're lousy at helping them be changed for the better as a result. And that's, to me, where the fantastic opportunity is. If you could just steepen people's average growth curve, right? Their learning curve as they go through their day or as they go through a day of work. As a manager, let's say we're trying to help people become more productive, creative, cooperative with each other, and motivated, increase morale, and so forth. If we want to do that, part of the process is helping people have useful experiences of those things. But then we need to also help them internalize those experiences as some kind of lasting change, right? And that's why I think that it's, really humbling to ask the question, okay, what could I do as I go through my day? Or what could I do as I help others, as a therapist or a coach or a manager or a teacher or a parent? What could I do to help others maximize the conversion rate of states to traits, of experiences to lasting change for the better in the brain?
I'm really interested in hearing from you. One of the most surprising things that you've discovered in your research about happiness, is there anything that you can think of that comes to your mind?
Two things that just blow my mind. And they blow my mind because I do them myself, even though I'm an expert on this stuff. Okay, the first is what scientists call the brain's negativity bias. Or as I put it kind of simply, we've got a brain that's like Velcro for bad experiences, but Teflon for good experiences. Even though learning from our good experiences is how to grow good stuff inside ourselves, like resilience, gratitude, compassion, confidence, and happiness. So that's the first thing. We have this negativity bias because our ancient ancestors needed both to avoid sticks, but get carrots too. Carrots like food and so forth. Well, here's the difference. If you don't get a carrot today, you'll have a chance at one tomorrow. But if you fail to avoid that stick today, that predator, that aggression inside your band or between bands, whack, no more carrots forever. So routinely, we scan for bad news out in the world and in our body and mind, and we overreact to it, fast track the whole package into memory. If 10 things happen in a day in your relationship, 9 are positive, 1's negative, what's the one you obsess about as you're falling asleep? If you get a performance review at work and your boss tells you 10 things, 9 are positive, 1 is room for improvement, what's the one you think about for the rest of the day? It's usually the negative one. And then the brain is also progressively sensitized to the negative through the stress hormone cortisol that is released also when we're just irritated or frazzled or frustrated or driven or we feel anxious or hurt. So that's takeaway number one. We've got this negativity bias that made sense back in the Stone Age, and it might make sense occasionally today if people are, working in a combat zone or growing up in a combat zone or what feels like a combat zone. All right, but most of the time, having a brain that's like Velcro for the bad, but Teflon for the good, wears us down over time, makes it harder to be successful at work, and it makes us builds conflicts and vicious cycles with other people. So one of the surprising takeaways for me was to be much more respectful, as it were, of the power of the dark side of the force. What I mean is much more kind of respectful of not ruminating about negative stuff. Because when we're ruminating about it, when we're just kind of rehashing resentments in our mind or beating ourselves up or, repeatedly going over conversations with other people with hurt feelings, when we do that, we are reinforcing that negative material. We are, our brain is very spongy for that crud. So the takeaway is to pull out of that red zone experience, if you will, as fast as you can and start shifting gears so you can move back more into kind of a green zone landing. That was takeaway one.
Really?
Takeaway two, and I'll say this one fast. It's striking how quickly, even in our so-called pleasure-seeking culture, how rapidly people blow by beneficial experiences. They finish a tricky email, bing, they're on to the next one. They have a nice moment with a friend or a partner or a child, whoosh, they're on to the next thing. They have some kind of real insight or thought that gives them some sense of relief, like, dodge that bullet, whoop, then they're on to the next worry. And I think part of that is kind of built into the culture. We have a very ADD culture. We're constantly being stimulated. We're always chasing the next thing. And also, I think some of that comes from this fear that if we just sort of marinate in the present moment that's beneficial, we'll lower our guard and lose our edge. But that's not actually true. When you marinate in the moment of whatever's beneficial, which is usually a fairly mild experience, but it's authentic, a moment of gratitude, a moment of feeling strong, a moment of determination, a moment of, a sense of reward from doing a workout or doing the right thing with, in life, let's say, in some way. Those experiences are really good for us. And when we marinate in them, we get stronger. We become more able, actually, to deal with bad things. And as we relish and savor and soak in and take in the good of these ordinary beneficial experiences, we can also, keep our eyes on the prize or be vigilant for some kind of threat coming in, or make sure that we keep on, tying our camel, even if we trust in God. In other words, it's not either or. So those are and for me, the two takeaway therefore is disengage from the negative as fast as you can. And second, when you are having some kind of beneficial experience, when life serves you that big dish right in front of you, whoosh, bring a big spoon.
That's really great. The first example that you're talking about how our minds, and there's this tendency, and it comes from inherited kind of physiological responses that we have, a propensity to look at the bad things that are happening or try to avoid the bad things. So we're kind of been programmed by nature to try to mitigate the bad as much as possible, look for the bad so that we can minimize it. But then that creates a mind and a system in your body that is always looking for the bad, and how that doesn't really help, not in today's age. Now, if you're in a battlefield, like you were saying, that's great. So that kind of just makes me wonder, how do we start training our minds to not do that as much? Is that even possible? Is that something we can do? Is that really humanly possible if physiologically, DNA, hardwire, it's in our system to look for the sticks, to look for the possible bad things that could happen and the things that are happening or will happen that are bad. So there's this kind of just focus on the bad.
Right.
So one, there's benefit to try to look for the good. How do we do that? And then that second piece that you talked about was really interesting to me too. It's one that I definitely want to take a little time to dive in as well, because one of the things I heard you talking about is marinating in the good, really acknowledging the wins that we have. And I know that that's something that I don't tend to do enough of. Today has been a pretty active day, but just in a conversation with my family and with Kamala, I know that some of the things that have been on my mind is, I really want to get here. I'm really excited to get to this place that's always kind of a little bit ahead of me, right? And yet when I heard you say that, I thought, well, yesterday evening I spent the evening 4 or 5 hours with my little nephews. They're incredible. Had a wonderful evening, wonderful meal, played with them, walked the dogs today, finished, almost done writing this book that I've been working on for months, and sent out emails. And I just thought, wow, it's been a really successful day. But I have not taken any time today to think about the success or marinate in the fact that I've done that. Instead, it's been one thing and then thinking of this bigger goal. And so I'm unsatisfied with the steps that I've taken and more just focus on this bigger goal. And so it's just kind of this loop. I don't celebrate, right? Or today I didn't celebrate those little things. And then I was focused on, well, I want to get there, but I'm not getting there. I need to get there. And if I don't get there, then bad things can happen. And it's this loop. And as I hear you talk, it's like, okay, how do we get out of that loop?
Right. Very deep, real stuff. Well, one way into it, I think, is the classic point about doing and being. In other words, we tend to do a lot, just like you're saying, do this, do that, accomplish this, accomplish that, in order to be something, be happy, be fulfilled, be someone who feels really appreciated by other people. But the problem is, if we do it the way we ordinarily do it, which is we're always doing and, being is just one step away, we never get to being. The whole point of doing is to get to being, but all that doing makes it impossible to get to being, right? It is perverse. So the solution is to start from being, flip it around. In other words, come from being already happy, already loved, already peaceful inside, on the basis of which we do. And it's really kind of a simple switch. It's a simple flip where you say, okay, what would it be like to establish inside myself a kind of baseline or fundamental sort of core of feeling already contented, already full, already balanced as I enter the next moment. Sustaining mindfulness, staying in the present, staying in the now, feeling already solid in my core, strong inside as I lean into life. That feels really, really different. And so that's the first point. Second point, people vary in their negativity bias. Some people, just by nature, they tend to be more aversive. They're more focused on what's unpleasant. They learn faster from it. So we start there, and then life happens, and people can increase their negativity bias. They can become more like Velcro for the bad if they had a rocky childhood or they're dealing in a high stress kind of situation, because stress sensitizes the brain and increases the negativity bias. But in either case, there actually is emerging research that shows that with repetition, think about how many times we take in the bad. That's a lot. We need to balance it by taking in the good 10,000 times, but it's just 10 seconds at a time, in other words. And I use that number 10,000, just kind of ballparking it. But by research shows, repeatedly registering rich, embodied, rewarding experiences that are beneficial of accomplishing this or that over the course of the day, feeling connected with other people in good ways, having wholesome pleasures of various kinds, feeling good inside, feeling like a good person inside. Any one of those, but all of those over the course of the day, repeatedly taking in the good, a dozen or more times a day, will gradually sensitize the brain. And in the title, actually, of a funny but very profound research paper on the neuropsychology of all this, we can over time develop what's called a joyful amygdala. That's a part of the brain, there are two of them actually, that is tracking continuously how relevant experiences are. And the amygdala on average tends to be oriented toward the negative. That's the negativity bias. But with practice, we can turn that amygdala around so it becomes more like Velcro for the good and Teflon for the bad. We'll still see real threats. We won't become stupid. We won't, run red lights or ignore serious threats. But we can approach life with less of an alarm bell inside, and with more efficiency and rapidity with which we learn from positive experiences.
Absolutely love what you're saying and sharing. And before we go, what is the number one thing that you want the Thriving Launchers to walk away with? One of the most important things about your work?
If I could get two, I'll sort of mush them together. The first of the two is to know what muscle you're growing these days. What I mean is, pick one thing. Okay, maybe two things that you're really trying to develop inside these days. Maybe like Louisa was saying, you're trying to develop more of an attitude of slowing down and really taking in good stuff along the way. All right, you're trying to learn to do that. It's a new habit. It's a positive habit, let's say. What is that positive habit or inner strength you're particularly focused on these days? Maybe it's what would really help to deal with a stressful situation at work, or maybe it's what would compensate for and soothe and eventually heal some leftover issue from a previous relationship or your childhood, like underlying feelings of inadequacy. For example, those would be really addressed by repeatedly taking in experiences of self-worth. Or maybe it's somebody who's got a longstanding sense of anxiety. They're nervous about things. Well, for that person, the key muscle to grow inside, the key resource to develop inside, let's say, would be feelings of calm or feeling safe and protected deep in their core to balance that anxiety. Or maybe it's someone who has longstanding issues with, let's say, chasing pleasure of one kind or another. That person would be aided by growing more of a sense of feeling contented already. Whatever it might be, what are you trying to develop? Frankly, early in my marriage, especially after kids came along, one thing I tried to really help land inside myself was that I needed to take my wife into account in all kinds of new ways once we had children, for example. So know what you're trying to grow. That was the suggestion. Then if I could slip another one in really fast, don't underestimate the power of little things. It's lots of little things that take us to a bad place, and therefore it's usually lots of little things that take us to a good place. Every day, even in the most terrible life in the world, the harder the life, the more important it is to do what I'm talking about here, which is to look for little authentic opportunities to take in the good along the way. And in so doing, really fill ourselves up over the course of a single day from the inside out. Don't underestimate all those little opportunities. If I could finish on a quotation, quote is, "Think not lightly of good, saying, it will not come to me. Drop by drop is the water pot filled. Likewise, the wise one, gathering it little by little, fills oneself with good."
We've been here with Dr. Rick Hanson talking about how to fill ourselves with good, really the neuroscience behind happiness. I encourage you all to go out today and practice some of these amazing tips that Dr. Rick Hanson has shared with us. Keep thriving, everyone.